Good morning. This is the last day of our Woodblock 2014, our first conference for Palermo, where we are bringing together faculty, students, and interested parties from all over the world to come and participate in both a conference that is occurring on the net, but also a conference that is occurring in Burlington, Vermont. I'm here with Dr. Sadler, who is one of our adjuncts and also I'd call you a YouTube celebrity teacher.
Academic, yeah.
Yeah. What we're going to talk today is, in our final session, is we're going to have a discussion again about our general studies program and how we're starting to conceive of that. And we'd love to take questions from our audience. The session's going to go about a half hour, and then half hour, maximum 45 minutes, although the two of us, I'm a little tired because we do tend to yak, later into the evening about all kinds of stuff, which is good, but I'm definitely suffering a sleep deficit as the week's gone on.
You throw a lot of ideas in there and you're juggling them. That tends to wear on you after a while.
Yep. So I'm going to look forward to a little time to go for a run and watch TV. But enough of my yakking. Let's boogie, to quote the immortal Spinal Tap. So let me pull down our Palermo General Studies wiki. But let me share just that screen. Okay. Oh, there's so much funny stuff about sharing screens. Okay, here we go. So a few days ago, in some of our earlier sessions, we've talked about the degree certificate and degree development guidelines, and that right now, Palermo, we're working hard to develop all kinds of different courses and put those courses within the context of starting to create certificate programs, which are groups of 3 or more classes, but that eventually, and sometime in the next year, but we're going to submit a letter of intent to the state of Vermont to become a degree granting institution. We're going to have degree programs that students can enter. But first, we need to build out more courses, create the certificates and the degrees. But in order to do that, we have to really understand some of the constraints and standards that we're under in terms of in the U.S. And that would be really this section in the law, okay, which is schools desiring to offer an associate degree shall provide and require completion a minimum of 60 credit hours. Okay, so what you do is for a Palermo, courses are 12 weeks long, and they consist of 3 credit hours. So that's 20 classes.
Yeah.
Okay, for about a BA degree, that's 40 classes. Now, and again, if you go to our certificate and degree development guidelines, those are the basics. So if you want to come up with a degree program in a subject, and it can, we would like to offer as broad a curriculum as possible. Think about potentially starting to design an associate's degree, although you can jump straight into the bachelor's. But remember that roughly half the courses in a degree program are going to be courses in that specialty area of studies. And the other half are going to be general education credits. Now, we may modify the percentages a bit, but we want to provide faculty and departments and groups of faculty with the ability to kind of develop a really in-depth program in that major, and to give them the flexibility to have the wide variety of classes and really in-depth knowledge, and that will be reflected both in the transcript, but as we've said before, really the value added for Palermo and for education, we think going forward, is in this skills portfolio piece. So that's the context that we're talking about. Now, if we go back and we take a look at, and this wiki is going to be updated. We're going to be fixing the navigation on this over the next week. We need to talk about the BA. Oh, there it is. General Studies for the AA and BA. So General Studies education credits, general education credits are kind of, for an associate's or a bachelor, are the things that people need to know to become educated in the 21st century. That's the question that we're kind of asking. Okay. Now, a little aside, the reason why there have to be a lot of general education credits is because, in my opinion, we've got high schools who are doing an okay job, but really in the United States, a lot of what was done in high schools 20, 30 years ago is now being done by colleges.
As remedial classes.
You know, and sort of bring people up and give them those the basic skills. And so I've identified the 5 areas that we should have general study classes in. Again, since we have a wiki, and since one of Palermo's big operating principles is openness, transparency, and participation, you know, we can have discussions. You can go on the discussion tab and chime in. You can also go on to, you know, I'll be expanding this obviously, but you can add and edit, and you can also disagree. Hey, you know, we might have very different ideas about what, you know, general studies needs to have. For me, and what our initial proposal that we can work off of is that, you know, everybody has to have knowledge of mathematics, but it's not just the computation piece, but being able to apply math. You need to read and write in your native language. So we're not going to say at Palermo we can already offer courses in all kinds of different languages. In all kinds of different languages in content areas. Okay, so if you're a professor and you teach philosophy, but yet your native language is Chinese or Spanish, then do it in that language. And you know, people need to be able to read and write well in their first language. Science and social science. I mean, the science piece, you really need to know the basics of science, biology, physics, chemistry, ecological science. But so science in general, it's a way of thinking. You should be familiar with that way of thinking and interacting with the world. And then the social sciences, which are kind of, you know, anthropology, economics, again, familiarity, that should be part of what a standard, well-educated 21st century human being has some knowledge of. And these are the social science, though, I mean, that's going to generate, it's going to be fun because it's going to generate an incredible amount of argument and spilt ink and blood.
Especially since within the social sciences, there are so many competing paradigms that love to critique, argue with each other about what the nature of psychology is or what the nature of anthropology is. So.
And to get to that point of, well, we'll talk a little bit about that later. We're not trying to, one of the things that Palermo is doing, we're an open learning organization, so we have to create protocols that allow faculty and students to navigate and choose what kind of paradigms, what kind of disciplines and approaches to things they want to take. Yeah. But what we have to do is make sure that, you know, there are sort of the basic guidelines and the basic standards with that, but not be prescriptive in terms of content areas or methodological approach.
Yeah.
The other piece is talking about, you'll notice what isn't in there, which needs to be, which I unfortunately just deleted, which is not a good omen, is the humanities and arts. Okay, that's also part of.
As I'm looking at that, I was thinking about our conversations about literature There's one other thing that often is placed in the humanities that I think would be good to set as its own area, though, because its methodology is often using some of the same tools, but its methodology is often different in the reasoning behind it, and that's history. There should be some. I'm not. And again, you're saying you don't want to be too prescriptive, and we definitely don't want to have just one Plato to NATO class trying to cover all of world history in one thing. But there should be some introduction to what it is that historians are doing. I would actually plump for two other areas in which philosophy is sort of the vanguard. There's plenty of others that feed into it. One would be, and these are both based not only on what should be in a general studies curriculum, but also what employers are really looking for. It comes up in their lists every time. One would be critical thinking. And critical thinking, a lot of people claim to be doing critical thinking, and you can do critical thinking in all these other areas. But there really should be some time where the students themselves engage with what is an argument. And you're not getting that necessarily in the write and read part. Not in the same way of analyzing, evaluating arguments, figuring out how to take weak arguments, make them stronger. There should be some time where there's some sort of concentration on that. And we can go through, besides what is an argument, there's a lot of components to critical thinking.
But you were mentioning that that report.
The APA Delphi report is the gold standard for what goes into critical thinking. And it distinguishes between dispositions and skills. It does it in a very nice way. It's been out there for about 20 years now, and I think anybody who claims to be teaching critical thinking in their classes should familiarize themselves with what it is that the experts, the ones who are teaching critical thinking, for a living, what they've, Delphi report, they got together and they hashed it out over a period of years. There's one other area that I think is important that's left out here. Again, it's something that, like critical thinking, can be done in a lot of these different contexts, but where I think it's great to have an emphasis where, look, for this one course or these two courses, we're actually going to focus just on that, and that's ethics. And you could put it in terms of ethics as in learning moral theories, ethics as in learning how to apply them, ethics as learning about classic text approaches, thinkers in this, learning about...
Well, let me just interject for a second. One of the things that when we're talking about history, especially when we're talking about ethics and moral theories, is that we have to make sure that people understand that we're not going for sort of an answer with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very important.
That, for example, history, and I want to put this down. This is the context in which I'm kind of looking at these issues, which is we, other, and us. Okay. I'm not going to put the big S. That's actually the exact opposite of what I'm trying to do. We is that different people come from different social, cultural, religious traditions.
Yeah.
And it's really important to understand, sort of your history, your background.
And many people, when they come to the table, they think that they know all about X because they grew up as X. Like when I teach ethics classes, and we'll just use, sort of a common example at the university that I'm teaching some classes at right now, where I have a lot of culturally Catholic students who will say, yeah, I just get it from the church. And then they actually have to read Thomas Aquinas, who's, supposed to be a big guy there, and they're like, wow, I didn't know about this stuff. And I'll say, well, that's your tradition. That's an integral part of it. And we hunker down and we plow through parts of the Summa, and they come out of it understanding much better about who their we is.
And then when you understand who the we is, you need to branch out and understand another. And another is something that, we are all human beings and we share that in common. But it's really important to have in-depth knowledge of another culture outside your own.
Yeah.
And I think that goes actually a little bit with the other language.
Not just generic sort of here's what these people think.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a real, I have a sort of a dream that, rather than, if I want to study in college, I was really lucky in one of my favorite teachers was a man named Hiroshi Miyagi. He was Japanese. He knew Japanese, Chinese, um, German, Sanskrit, really amazing polymorph. He knew both Japanese and Chinese philosophy really, really well. But he also loved Schopenhauer, Hegel, and Nietzsche. And I think that what made him an incredibly powerful scholar is he had full knowledge of his own tradition and intellectual background and history. He also had an amazing knowledge of something that was outside of what he grew up in. I mean, he was an officer in the Japanese Imperial Army, and he had a great understanding of his culture, but also an amazing understanding of another culture that he wasn't
That's what allows
from.
you to be able to do any successful comparative work.
Yep, and I think it also allows you today to be a successful human being, because we're always going to encounter people who have very different takes on the world, on morality, religion, ethics, history.
Yeah.
But if we don't have the ability to kind of access where they're coming from, okay, you're not going to be able to generate what is the last piece of this, which is the us. Okay, I don't know how to properly articulate this, but it's a kind of a cosmopolitanism, not an elitist cosmopolitanism, but a notion of trying to figure out, well, what are some of the common things that humanity shares, because experiences or whatever, because we're human beings. And I don't think you can get that if you don't understand where you're from.
Yes.
What you don't understand the traditions and the history that you're a product of. Okay, and you don't understand at least in some depth where another person may come from.
I'd say another important part of the developing the skills of the us is learning how to be able to disagree with other people well. Because, if there are reasons why dialogue can't just be this kind of wishy-washy, well, we're all really on the same page, we just have different content kind of stuff. To be able to respectfully disagree takes a lot of practice, and we don't have a lot of good models for that. Certainly not the talking heads things that we have on TV. That's like counterproductive learning that people are going through in how to disagree. And when you can actually articulate, here's where I'm coming from, here's our we, and start to be able to engage other people's you can figure out where the interference areas are, where it's tough to communicate well. Sometimes even for people in the same tradition, there can be interference areas.
Can you fix the spelling on that? Because the
irreconcilability.
The dyslexia is catching up to me right now.
Yeah, irreconcilability.
So in one of the teachers and the people that I like to read is a guy named Robert Nash, and he talks about the art of moral conversation, and that means it stems from an idea of that listening, and you don't have to agree with someone.
Yeah.
Okay. But you have to hear what they say. So we're not talking about that sort of warmed over. The warmed over multiculturalism. We're all on the same page. We can get it.
We just have different backgrounds.
Yup, but
if we could anything.
No, because But that means that we also have to have with moral conversation an ethics of irreconcilability, meaning that there are the best education and the best encounters, the best dialogues are the ones in which you have deep disagreement. Okay. And you have to figure out a way to navigate. Not everyone in the world thinks like you do, and there are going to be situations where they have bottom lines and you have bottom lines, that are going to be absolutely opposed.
And sometimes a person may find out that their bottom lines don't turn out that way, but it never happens because somebody bested them in argument that day. It'll happen because they know somebody who represents that perspective, and yet they seem like a perfectly decent human being, and perhaps even a friend. And then over conversations, over meals, over reflecting on how does that guy over there actually live with himself for a while, a kind of loosening takes place, and then the person is able to say, well, maybe that standpoint could actually be more rational, more well-grounded than I've been giving it thought. And then sometimes things that seem to be the hard sticking points that can never be brought into question, people can decide then for themselves. This is empowering. They can decide for themselves, do I want to retain this part of what I think is my old we, which often turns out not to be a we, but rather part of the ego.
Yeah, well, I mean, and pardon the pun, but we shall see. But in terms of these general education credits, we have to create, Palermo is really committed to creating the maximum flexibility for, so we're not going to require our intro to history class.
Yeah.
Okay? We're not going to design one and then say every undergraduate must take X.
Yeah.
And then we get into culture wars and battles about all kinds of crazy stuff.
Sometimes when colleges do that, they avoid the culture war by saying everybody's going to take intro to history, and then they'll leave it up to the instructors. Just teach it however the hell you want.
Yeah.
That's not going to work either, because then you can't say that you're actually teaching the same skills.
Right. So we want people embedded in the skills, but we want, for example, if I'm sort of a product of Scottish, English, probably a little, dashes of French Canadian and Abenaki. I should be able to know and take history classes on all those particular areas. And as though,
nice.
I mean, and we, there hopefully will be, as faculty builds, as a curriculum expands, there's the ability for me to start accessing an understanding of where I come from, etc. But I also need to, as an undergraduate, I've really got to be familiar with the history of other cultures and other major world cultures. For me, I think it's critical. We understand about Chinese, Indian, and Latin American history, but that's what I was interested in.
Yeah.
If another student is going to be another person living in a particular place is going to be engaged with other cultures and other belief systems,
perhaps the focus is on sub-Saharan Africa, or Islamic culture as well in civilization, from the beginnings all the way through, spreading across continents.
And wouldn't it be great to be able to take a course with a course on Islamic history with an imam in Iran, or with an imam in Saudi Arabia? We have to be able to create spaces where we're engaging much more in depth with people and really getting a sense of how they perceive the world and what their history is, and respecting that. But also, again, having, we all have bottom lines. We all need to practice both moral conversation and and understanding that we're also not going to agree with everything all the time.
Something that comes to mind when I'm thinking about the expansion of the curriculum and this, a lot of state schools will actually have, like Indiana, in a lot of the state schools, they'll have an Indiana history. And I don't know that Palermo would actually want to offer classes in Rhode Island history and Texas history, but perhaps histories of regions, like the history of, New England from this time to this time.
Well, if a faculty member wants to offer a course in Rhode Island history, go ahead.
Yeah,
that's the thing about the academic freedom piece, is that it's not. I think it's not up to. It's up to us to make sure the quality is good. Yeah. It's up to us to to have these conversations about what are sort of the what are the protocols, the context in which a general education course should happen.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a good idea for us to be saying, okay, a plan, we're not going to have a course. We're not going to have a methodology like that. Let's let the people decide. Let's let the people decide, and the students decide, and the faculty decide how they want to navigate these particular
I think
issues.
you do have the capacity, though, not to say, can't do this, but rather to say, here's where the priorities are. I mean, you've got a list of desired classes. Here's what we really want to see in the mix.
So please,
it's more like an incentive system rather than a guardrail system. You can think of it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that will come up. I'll create the desire for the list. Classes.
No, list of desired classes.
List of desired classes.
Well, you have one. It's just that's going to change over time, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it's a little tricky. Desired classes. There we go. It's a little create the list.
Rather the for.
There we go. On the fly editing.
Yeah.
There we go. One of the things, though, that has people a little bit stumped about what we're doing at Aplerno is they come in. A lot of faculty come in with being socialized in a particular way about when you think about it. You get assigned a particular. I wanted you to teach history of da da da.
Yeah.
And here's our approved required textbook. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the notion that level of academic freedom and agency has been eroding over the past couple of decades, where what we're trying to do is reverse the trend. In other words, the only thing about having we need a list of desired classes, but I'm already getting in terms of feedback from faculty where they'll ask us a question of, so how do you want me to teach?
Yeah, I remember those meetings where people were writing those questions. Yeah.
And it's really funny to say, no, I'm not, you're the expert in such and such a field. We have, as long as we, for right now, I want to be the least prescriptive in terms of methodological and subject area questions.
Yeah.
And I want to concentrate on just for the associates in the VA. Here are some basic things that we need. I think also the biggest piece is, the discussion of transfer credits. Okay, we had a nice, discussion last night. It's a no-brainer that you're going to accept transfer credits from institutions that have state, national, regional accreditation.
Yeah.
No-brainer.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get into a discussion of the percentage, okay, that we take in.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to be a case of somebody's missing, one
Three
class,
credits,
3 credits, and then they get their degree from Aplerno, even though, however, the barriers that institutions put up to transfer credits is really, I don't like it because one of the big issues we have is people with a lot of credits in different places. They're perfectly competent. The classes that they're asking to transfer in are perfectly good, but the university or college won't accept them. And they're not accepting them because, basically, they want the students to take credits in their institution and be paying them. And we're not up for that. Our goal is we want the maximum amount of students. We want faculty teaching, okay? And so it's not that the money needs and the revenue and the capital need to go to the faculty. So if we can figure out ways in which to make it easier for someone to transfer into Aplerno, transfer credits for a degree, and so that's going to generate a demand and take classes, and so that faculty can get paid and teach, then that's what we're up for. So the whole question of are we going to accept Coursera and edX credits, I'm going to be talking a little bit with the Agency of Education in the state of Vermont of whether that would even be,
feasible.
feasible.
Yeah.
And I'm going to really make the argument that it should, because after all,
They're being billed as this is a such and such class, and we're not skimping on any of it.
So I mean, it either meets a standard for a class,
yeah,
or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then what is Coursera and edX doing putting out those classes online?
It's interesting. The completion rate for these MOOCs, this is one of the problems that people have pointed out, is extremely low. But one of the reasons why the completion rate is extremely low is because you actually have to do a lot in order to complete these classes. If you're looking at MOOCs just in terms of how they're put together and what the average person is doing, they're actually not very rigorous. But that's because the average person is not following through the whole sequence, completing all the assignments, engaging in all the activities. If you're actually doing that, it's a pretty sizable investment of time, and the learning should be taking place. So
I also think it's Coursera and edX are great hooks. To get people back into the oh, excuse me, I'm kind of sneezing all the time. To get
it out.
Okay. To get people hooked back into education and self-improvement.
There's a lot of people who probably, there's a hunger out there for education and having free classes. Some people, are doing it by just going to YouTube and down, looking at videos and saying, I'm going to study this on my own. But a lot of people do need, there to be a program, for there to be, admittedly, some people need there to be a prestige name to get them hooked into it, and if that gets them going.
Yeah. And I also like the fact that in lots of places in the world where there's not a great access to education, again, it creates a hook. It is exactly what, Paulo Freire, talked about in terms of engagement and pedagogy of the oppressed and about agency. I mean, now you have people taking the steps to educating themselves. What should happen, though, is, Coursera should be able to offer, if these are courses that meet the standards
of those universities,
which they say they do, then they should offer them for credit. It's a no-brainer. So then the question is why?
Because they're free.
Yeah.
They don't want to, they don't want people taking 4-credit classes at their, exclusive institutions for free.
Yeah, it does. It does, as they said.
But so what you're talking about is really repurposing. There's what Coursera and edX want to do with their courses, and what the participating member institutions working with them want to do with those courses. But there's no reason why we have to be confined to their motives, their intentionalities with those. We can repurpose them and maybe even make them into what they ought to be rather than just what they currently are.
I mean, I do think, though, that, for introductory courses, a large lecture format is great, but is fine.
It depends on the student.
Yeah, but there should be a diversity of ways in which you can get that introductory class.
Yeah.
And I do think, human beings learn best from other human beings in small groups.
Yeah.
And so having the less than 20 is going to be important.
I agree, and you can't have the sort of engagement that the student needs from the professor for a lot of these things, particularly, and again, I'm going to talk about my own discipline. So we don't teach critical thinking or ethics in our K-12 system here in the United States. They do in other places because they have a philosophy component, say in the Portuguese national curriculum. They're actually using some of my videos for that on Camus. So it's not just like watered down stuff. It's real stuff. But in America, you come out of the average high school and your teachers have talked about critical thinking, for example, but they've never actually done in any rigorous way that. So then you get to the critical thinking class and you're lost.
Right.
That's when you actually need to have the class size under 25 so that the instructor can actually give you a lot of assignments, actually read those assignments, not machine grade them, not Scantron them, but actually read through them, give you feedback, and that entire loop for formative assessment can take place. That's, it's all the more needed for any student who got the short end of the stick in the educational system.
A couple of people have sent emails asking whether high school students could take clerical
Yeah.
classes, and start working on their degrees as